can help.
You may have to.
I'm telling you, I'm not bragging because
Well, go for medical marijuana.
it's like just you're waiting for the floor to drop sometimes, but I can't listen. It's been my biggest stressor too.
Oh, I feel the same way. I was smoking.
I've never
I've never smoked a cigarette. I've never touched a cigarette.
Good.
Same here.
Is it happening? Oh, I think I just think yeah. I don't see thinking. It's just sorry. I'm always double multitasking.
Pretty soon we go by with breathing marijuana.
With those kids.
My friend invited me this year. It's really nice. I've never gone. But then watch
It's like the 12 and a half. I'm trying to, because I wanted that. I can't get something to like, and they won't give me that.
They'll turn it on. It's on there. Good morning and welcome to our session on optimizing aging. My name's Angelique Jackson. I'm the Manager of Business Development and Marketing at Charles E. Smith Life Communities. And it is my pleasure to introduce you to our speaker, Dr. Carolyn Eichberg. Dr. Carolyn Eichberg is a clinical psychologist consultant for Charles E. Smith Life Communities, where she provides behavioral health services to post-acute rehab, long-term care, assisted living, independent living, community residents. For the past 15 years, her practice has included neurocognitive testing, psychotherapy, multidisciplinary consultation, behavior management, decisional capacity evaluations, and staff education. Dr. Eichberg has published research papers and presented at conferences nationally. She attended both Cornell and the University of Virginia and is a member of the American Geriatric Society. I just want to say we do welcome all of your questions, but please wait until after the presentation, and we do have a microphone there. Make sure if you have a question to approach the mic so that the people online can hear your questions. And now, Dr. Carolyn Eichberg.
No, please, no falls, no falls. All right, everyone can hear me okay? So in keeping with activity, it's difficult for me to stand still, so I'm mic'd to walk around. So in planning this year's symposium, once we identified healthy aging as our central theme, I recommended that one of the breakout sessions should focus on exercise, and not just its benefits for physical health, but for mental health as well as provide information about local, state, and national organizations that are dedicated to providing competitive sports events for older adults. Well, it was pointed out to me that since I'm a runner and I've competed in some of these organizations, and I'm a psychologist, that I might have something to say on this topic. So that explains why I'm dressed like this today. I didn't want you to think that given the past 3 years I've worked predominantly on a remote telehealth basis, that I've completely surrendered my formal attire for casual gear. And more about my apparel later in the talk. So in terms of my title, as a psychologist, people referred to me for difficulties, problems, deficits, impairments. And I like to think instead of, well, what are the strengths? What are the competencies? What are the interests? What are the needs? So in that vein, the title of my talk is how do we optimize aging? Of course, all of us as we age, we experience loss and decline, but let's think more in terms of physical activity opportunities. So some of you may have seen in the Washington Post last month, there was an editorial that was entitled, "The 75-Minute Solution to a Longer Life." And in it, Dr. Wen wrote, imagine that there was a medical therapy that reduces your risk of stroke and heart disease by 27%, it cuts your chance of developing cancer by 12%, and decreases your overall risk of premature death by 31%. Well, if such a drug existed, it would be hailed a miracle. What we're talking about here is physical activity. And specifically, in February of this year, there was a meta-analysis of 196 peer-reviewed articles in the British Journal of Sports Medicine, and it found a robust linkage of physical activity to these astounding reductions. Specifically, 150 minutes a week of moderate intensity exercise, and in a few minutes I'll define what moderate intensity means, is linked to these outcomes. But even more astonishing is just 75 minutes a week, that's just 11 minutes a day of moderate intensity exercise is associated with a 17% reduction in cardiovascular death, a 7% reduction in cancer, and a 23% lower risk of early death. So again, our theme today is enhancement of successful aging. One thing we do know is that mental health is really a substantial component of perceived quality of life as we age, and that in turn affects physical health. We need to think about, as a psychologist, I'm a PhD, I think of non-pharmacological approaches. So in that vein, what are some modifiable behaviors and lifestyles that might affect mental health? We know that there are health benefits of physical activity in older adults. That's well established in the research literature. And as I've just alluded to, physical activity can reduce morbidity, that should say mortality, morbidity and mortality from many chronic diseases. It postpones disability, and it prolongs independent living. But we also know that physical activity is beneficial for our mental health, our well-being, and our cognitive function. And one example of this is that there's a positive association that's evidenced between physical activity and the alleviation of symptoms of anxiety and depression. Now, back in 2009, the Surgeon General issued a report about physical activity and health in older adults. It's just as relevant today. So some facts. Loss of strength and stamina attributed to aging is partly due to reduced physical activity. We know that inactivity increases with age. And surprisingly, by age 75, about 1 in 3 men and 1 in 2 women engage in no physical activities. Among adults aged 65 and older, walking and gardening or yard work are by far the most popular physical activities. And for myself, apart from my love of running, outside of work, I have a passion for gardening. I'm a firm believer in the powers of nature, engagement in nature to really improve one's well-being. And most certainly during this pandemic, when we've had an unprecedented surge in mental health issues, for me it's become very therapeutic to engage in gardening. So some key messages is that older adults, both male and female, can benefit from regular physical activity. It doesn't need to be strenuous to achieve your health benefits. Simply buying some flowers, some potting soil, and putting them in a container or a window box. If you want something a little bit more strenuous, then planting tulip bulbs, which I can attest to requires much more activity, or pulling weeds. And that older adults can obtain significant health benefits with a moderate amount of physical activity, preferably daily. So when we think of aging, we think of how can we maintain our independent living status? How can we continue with our activities of daily living? Well, we need 4 physical attributes. The first is cardiorespiratory fitness. The ability of our heart and blood vessels to distribute and use oxygen during exertion falls by more than 21% per decade over 70, and that's just for healthy people. We need muscle strength and power. We know that muscle mass decreases by 3 to 8% per decade after 30, with decline accelerating after age 60. And this reduces our ability of our muscles to exert force to lift objects like grocery bags, Amazon packages, and the power to do work like stairs quickly. The third physical attribute that we need is dynamic balance. This is so essential for walking, stair climbing, and avoiding falls. And this is due to a decline in the duration of our musculoskeletal system and our neurological function. And finally, we need flexibility. And things that can help with flexibility include Tai Chi, Pilates, and yoga. So I said that I would define intensity. So what are we talking about when we talk about physical activity? Well, the CDC and the American College of Sports Medicine uses something called a MET. And it's a measure that stands for metabolic equivalent of task or energy it takes to sit quietly. So 1 MET is just sitting quietly. If you're talking about moderate intensity physical activity, you require 3 to 6 METs, or that should be 3.5 to 7 kcals a minute. So you can talk, but perhaps not sing during this activity. So some examples are brisk walking, 3 to 4.5 miles an hour, light bicycling, pickleball, very popular these days, yoga, water aerobics, golf, moderate household cleaning, and especially important to me, as I'm now the proud grandparent of a 10-month-old, actively playing with one's grandchild, or carrying a child that weighs less than 25 pounds up a flight of stairs, and gardening. And then if we're talking about vigorous intensity physical activity, that's more than 6 METs or more than 7 kcals a minute. So perhaps you won't be able to say more than a few words without pausing for breath. So examples of this are running 6 miles per hour, fast bicycling, tennis if you play singles, doubles would be moderate, lap swimming, carrying a child more than 25 pounds, competitive sports, jumping ropes, shoveling, heavy yard work, hiking uphill with a heavy backpack, and aerobic dancing. Ballroom dancing would be moderate. So I know these slides are this one's a little hard to see, so I'm going to go over this. The World Health Organization issued guidelines back in 2020 for all age groups about physical activity and also about sedentary behavior. So what they talk about, and I'm going to emphasize older adults, 65 and older. So what they emphasize is that there is a strong recommendation for the amount of physical activity they're going to recommend because it has benefits for improved all-cause mortality, cardiovascular disease, hypertension, site-specific cancers, diabetes, type 2 diabetes, mental health, cognitive health, and sleep. And it also helps prevent falls, falls-related injuries, and declines in bone health and functional ability. So what they recommend is that older adults, 65 and older, should engage in at least 150 to 300 minutes a week of moderate intensity aerobic physical activity. Aerobic activity is your brisk walking, your running, your swimming, or at least 75 to 150 minutes of vigorous intensity aerobic physical activity, or some kind of combination, moderate and vigorous. And then if you want additional health benefits, then at least 2 days you should engage in muscle strengthening activities at a moderate or greater intensity that involves all your major muscle groups. And then at least 3 days you should do multi-component physical activity. And this will include functional balance and strength training. And examples of functional balance might be standing on your toes, walking while lifting your knees, walking backwards. And strength would be pushing your body with your hands to the wall, lifting your arms side to side with dumbbells, going from sit to stand. And I should pause here and let you all know, I'm a psychologist. I'm not a physical therapist. I'm not a physical trainer. So if you want to ask specifics about exercise, this is sort of not my area of specialization. But those are some examples. And then the WHO goes on to talk about if you want additional benefits that you should do more than 300 minutes a week of moderate intensity exercise and more than 150 minutes of that vigorous intensity exercise. But what they emphasize, what's most important is some is better than none. And as I said at the beginning of my talk, even 11 minutes a day has health benefits. And if you're not meeting the recommendation, then you can still, it's never too late. You can start. And that you should start small and then gradually increase your frequency, your intensity, and your duration, and do as much as your functional ability allows, and then adjust it, as you feel more physically fit. The WHO goes on then to talk about sedentary behavior, and they talk about the concern about this. And I have to point out the fact that there are benefits of sedentary activity for cognitive health and social health, in some examples of that. So there are, some of us sit on the computer and perhaps we're writing papers or we're researching or we're doing cognitive games. So that benefits our brain health, or we're attending lectures such as this, but we're sitting. or even sitting activities, playing card games, or sitting on the computer Zoom when talking with your family. So there are social benefits and cognitive, it's just that at the same time, we do have to still move sometimes. A few years ago, before the pandemic, in one of our independent buildings, there was a group of women that would play mahjong, and they would play for hours and hours. And their daughters became concerned. They were trying to convince them, why don't you join the exercise class down the hallway, which they had no interest in. So what they did is they set a timer, and at some point they'd get up and they'd do laps around the table, and then they'd sit back down again. And not to be outdone, there was another table of bridge players. And the bridge players decided to bring little dumbbells, so they would take a break and they'd do their little dumbbells and chair, and it became very competitive. But that's how they engage in some physical activity while still, enjoying the social benefits of their sedentary behavior. So again, we need to limit how much time we spend sedentary and replace it with more physical activity. And this could even just be light intensity, just simply, activities of daily living, going about our daily business. The WHO then goes on to emphasize if you have chronic conditions, so folks that have cancer, living with hypertension, type 2 diabetes, Parkinson's, that they should still also try to do that more than 300 minutes a week of exercise or more than 150 minutes of vigorous. And they don't necessarily need a pre-exercise medical clearance. So if they don't have any major contraindications, they don't have to have that first before engaging in light or moderate activity. And again, they should just aim to do some activity, the best of their abilities, start small, increase over time, intensity, frequency, duration. But they may want to consult with a physical activity specialist or a healthcare professional to find out, what would benefit, how they get the best bang for their buck. I know for myself, I've got very strong legs. I love to walk. I love to run. I'm not so excited about the arm exercises. And as I've gotten older, I realize how important that really is, or my core. So I've got to sort of balance that with the work I do with my legs. So, and again, for folks with chronic conditions, to limit that sedentary behavior and replace it with more physical activity. And this is just going through, this is the second slide, doing more than 300, more than 150, and then for folks with chronic conditions. And I know this is hard to read, there's references at the end, and folks can look this up online to see. So I've talked a great deal about physical health benefits, but let's talk about what are the psychological functions of exercise in older adults. Well, again, the American College of Sports Medicine, it outlines 3 domains that physical activity impacts in terms of psychological functions. The first being psychological well-being, the second being cognitive health, and the third being quality of life. So first, for psychological well-being, they issue an evidence statement and recommendations that regular physical activity is associated with significant improvements in overall psychological well-being, that both physical fitness and aerobic exercise training is associated with a decreased risk for clinical depression or anxiety. And the belief is that the way in which this impacts our well-being is through the moderating and mediating effects of constructs such as our self-concept and our self-esteem. The second area is cognitive functioning. So here, what the American College of Sports Medicine says is that cardiovascular fitness and higher levels of physical activity reduce the risk of cognitive decline and dementia. Some of you may also have seen in the Washington Post, I think it was last month, there's a front page article about early onset Alzheimer's. And there was a woman in there who was the former president of Swarthmore, and she had just recently been diagnosed. And there's a section there which emphasized the engagement in physical activity and how she was engaging in that to help try to stem off some of the decline she would experience in terms of cognitive functioning. Aerobic exercise training and RET, that's resistance exercise training. And if we talk about resistance, we're talking about doing planks, sit-ups, those stretchy bands. That's resistance exercise training. So either doing aerobic or resistance, but especially if you combine those two together, you can improve your cognitive performance. And folks that were previously sedentary, on some measure, not across the board for cognitive functioning, but I think what's most exciting is what it does impact. So the evidence shows that those fitness effects are greatest for our complex tasks requiring executive control. So that's our ability to plan, to organize, to initiate a task, to stay focused. And I'm called upon in my work a great deal of the time to do evaluations, decide, does someone still have the capacity to decide about their health care, about their residential living choices? And having those executive skills, judgment, is just critical. So if you want a real bang for your buck, that's it, if it affects our executive, control. And then finally, what's the connection with quality of life? Well, the research shows that there is a positive association with some aspects of quality of life. The precise nature is poorly understood. I'm going to come back to this with a different slide and talk a little bit more about quality of life. So if we talk about, so how does this work? What are the underlying mechanisms? We know there's association with physical activity and mental health, and why is that? Well, Dolick and Pedrick have an article in which they outline 7 hypotheses about why this might be. And they divide up into 3 domains. The first is a neurobiological or physiological mechanism. And under this, there are 3 hypotheses. The first is the monoamine hypothesis. And that's that by engaging in physical activity, we can balance our levels of neurotransmitters. And we know that usually these are imbalanced in people suffering from depression. As many of you know, antidepressants work by targeting low levels of neurotransmitters. So that's one hypothesis. The second is a thermogenic hypothesis. And that's that physical activity facilitates an increase in body temperature that leads to a more relaxed state and mood enhancement. And then finally, the endorphin hypothesis. And that's that after physical activity, there's a release of beta endorphins, and that produces a morphine-like effect, reduces our pain sensation, and it provides a positive mood state and overall sense of well-being. And then we talk about the psychological mechanisms. And under this category, there are 2 hypotheses. The first is just quite simply a distraction hypothesis. If you're engaging in physical activity, you're distracted from your depressive thoughts or ruminating thoughts, your worries. So that's one. The second is self-efficacy hypothesis, that by engaging in physical activity, you have a better sense of physical competence, positive feelings of achievement, an increased sense of ability, and self-confidence. And I would add to that also control. And the final category is social mechanisms. Well, under this, there's one hypothesis, the social interaction hypothesis, that by engaging in physical fitness, we can interact and get support from others, whether it's one-on-one with a physical trainer, whether it's taking a walk with a friend, or being in a small group exercise or a class, and that provides a significant proportion of the physical activity effect on mental health. I mentioned that I'd come back to quality of life. So what is quality of life? Quality of life is a construct, and it's basically our overall satisfaction with life. So it includes our functional ability, our psychological well-being, our social relationships, our living environment, our socioeconomic status, activities, health, cultural, and ethical values. One thing that we know is that older adults are more concerned with quality of life than longevity. I can't tell you how often adult children come to me and say, I just want her to, be around for her 95th birthday, or come on, you can do it. We have a big 90. What they're more concerned about is what the quality of life is. And I work with a lot of people who are suffering from disease or terminal illness. And again, that it's not the length of life, it's the quality of life. So we do know that physical activity is associated with an enhanced quality of later life. And why this is, again, it's these moderating and mediating variables. The self-efficacy, the belief that one has the capabilities to achieve a goal or outcome. It can be huge, like being in a race like I participate in, or it can be simply being able to actually get out of your bed and walk to the bathroom and use the commode on your own. And self-concept and self-esteem. So we talk about physical activity, we can't just talk about move. You have to think about, well, how do you get someone to initiate physical activity and then adhere? And for all of us, that's a harder thing too, is we can start something, New Year's resolutions, but how do you adhere to a program? So I thought I'd first just give you, what's a simple definition of exercise? Well, the CDC defines it as planned, structured, repetitive, and purposeful activity a person engages in to stay or get healthy. And then if we talk about motivation, well, what is that? That's the need, the desire, or willingness to do something, like physical exercise, to achieve a desired outcome, improve physical health, improve mental health, and that plays a role in initiation and adherence to exercise activity. So O'Neill and Associates outlined some strategies for physical activity, and to maximize initiation, they say the need to set specific, personalized, and realizable goals. I can't underline how critical this is. As many of you know, I work in a post-acute rehab setting. And people are referred to me on a weekly basis saying they're resisting, they're declining physical therapy, occupational therapy. They're not motivated. They're not motivated. When I talk to the patients, they'll say, I just don't know if I'm making any progress, and I'm never going to be able to walk again after they break a hip and they can't bear weight. And they say I'm doing well, I'm working hard, hang in there. But what they really need is specific, personalized, realizable goals. What are their short-term objectives? And OTs and PTs, they have this information. They have to chart it. They have to submit it for insurance reimbursement. So to sit with the folks and tell them, today, here's our very short-term objectives, and then give some specific feedback. You did this 50% of the time, to then be able to chart it over the course of the week. So people can see that there's a stepwise sequence to work toward. There's a lot of steps involved before one walks out of a rehab setting. And if people can, and a lot of people I work with, in life, they use their intellectual skills or goals to run a household, to run a business. So if you give them these really precise goals, that helps them initiate. And then we have to talk about adherence. Well, then they can sort of monitor, and you can coach them and give them more personalized feedback. The final strategy is information and communication technologies. That's things like a smartwatch. On my phone, I have an app that tells me how far I run and what my time is. So those can allow someone to do more precise, individualized sort of coaching. And then I wanted to see, are there any measures? I use mood screens, I do cognitive screens, and are there any questionnaires that we have that could kind of give us a measure of motivation? They're very limited, but there is one called the Behavioral Regulation and Exercise Questionnaire 3, the BREG 3 by Marklin and Tobin. And it has good psychometric properties. It's 24 items, and it measures 6 domains: intrinsic motivation, A motivation. And just to give you an example of a couple of the items, people scored on a Likert scale, 0 to 4. It's important for me to exercise regularly. I can't see why I should bother exercising. I enjoy my exercise sessions. I feel under pressure from my friends or family to exercise. So this has its limitations, but that it's a quick and dirty screen. So one could do this, and then it's a screening tool, and it gets a conversation started. So in that way, it does offer some benefits. But I think even more important is the next couple of slides I'm going to be talking about. So what I like to do in working with people is engage in a problem-solving approach. It's not helpful if someone comes to me and says they're just not motivated. It's more complicated than that, Or, friends, colleagues will come to me and say, I'd like to, but I can't. Well, you have to break it down and find out what gets in the way and what helps. So Bethencourt has an article that I found really, really helpful, and talk about what are barriers to physical activity and what are facilitators. And working through this and charting helps us then figure out how to get someone initiated and how to get them to adhere to a program. So they break it down in different domains. The first is interpersonal level factors. And under this, the first category is physical or mental health. So what gets in the way? Quite simply, pain, not having enough endurance and balance. It takes more time to recover. The risk of injury and fear of falling, huge for folks that have had a fall and a fracture, that fear of falling. And on the flip side, what facilitates? Well, that potentially you can prevent health problems, you can manage your existing conditions, you can maintain balance and strength and mental acuity, potentially lose weight, and boost your mood. And then we go on to what are your individual preferences. And under this, a barrier, dislike of physical activity, people just don't like activity, despite what their adult kids think would be good for them. Gyms, I don't like gyms. I love to be outside. It takes a lot for me to be inside on the treadmill or an indoor swimming pool. They don't like organized groups. They're intimidated, embarrassed in front of people. You walk into a gym and you see a lot of young, very, folks that look like, built quite well and exercise. It's intimidating. They don't know what kind of physical activity to even start with, and they like their sedentary activities, and they're not accustomed to doing it. On the flip side, do they enjoy physical activity? They believe it's important. They feel guilty when they're not moving. It's part of the routine, and you can combine it as the ladies playing mahjong with these enjoyable, useful activities. The next domain is to look at interpersonal level factors, and again, barriers and facilitators. So a barrier is they don't have a professional that's going to guide them. They're not motivated by their instructors. They don't have information about what are some physical activity programs. They're being pushed too hard, or again, having others around them while they're exercising is intimidating. On the flip side, perhaps they get encouragement from others. They have the companionships of others and camaraderie, and the professionals guiding them, or they see others as models or incentives. I know one of the things that sort of spurs me on in my activity is I work with so many older adults that are no longer able to move the way they did, and they get quite excited about, my races and my achievements, and give them feedback, and they look forward to that. It kind of motivates them to do little bits of activity. And then if we talk about physical environment factors, well, are there hills and stairs? Are the sidewalks uneven? Earlier in my life, I never even thought about the surface. I used to ski down slopes. I used to run anywhere. I had a fall and an injury, and believe me, I am very conscious of the surface that I'm on at all times. So important. Bad weather, the neighborhood's unsafe, or even I live in Potomac, but I'm a woman running alone. There are many places that would be beautiful to run. I don't, because again, I'm a woman and alone. And maybe the location is not aesthetically pleasing, or it's inconvenient to get there. Perhaps they don't drive anymore. On the flip side of it, they live in a walkable area. Is the weather nice? There are places to rest. That's really important around our senior communities. Are there enough places to pause and sit and take a break? And are the surfaces even? And do they have some alternatives if the weather's bad? Do they have options at home? So during the pandemic, there were suddenly so many things available in terms of exercise online. And that was really helpful. A lot of people really got into it. But then again, there were a lot of people who really missed that sort of doing it together with someone, or that in person, and they really needed that to sort of motivate them and engage them. And then finally, structural and organizational factors. So is it expensive to drive or use facilities? Gyms are not inexpensive. Are there limited SS and EF facilities? I didn't know what these were. These are 2 nationally disseminated community-based programs that are free of charge. You can put your zip code in and find out if there are any programs in the area where you live. The first is Silver Sneakers, and it has live online fitness classes, videos, and gym access for eligible Medicare plans. And the second is called Enhanced Fitness, and it has evidence-based falls prevention and physical activity classes that meet 3 times a week. Okay, before I shift and talk about the Maryland Senior Olympics, which explains why I'm dressed this way, a little bit about my activity background. So as a youth, I was active. In middle school, I was on the volleyball team, if you can believe that, cheerleading squad, track, and kickball team. But then when I got to high school, the focus was on academics, and I played violin, piano, and sang in a choir, and volunteered in a hospital. So no formal athletics. I went to Cornell, and as part of New York State in college, you're required 2 years of PE. So I like to ice skate. I ice skate, I learned to ski. And after those 2 years were up, I realized how important having that physical activity outlet was for me while studying, especially my senior year when I was doing a senior honors thesis. I took up running as a way to sort of decompress. Then when I went on to University of Virginia for my master's and PhD, I continued with the running, not competing. Also, running sort of became a thing in this country then. And then as a young professional, and while raising my family, I stayed active. I've raised 2 sons, so everything was always active. But running, not predominant, a lot of different things. But I did engage in 5Ks, never half marathons or marathons. And a lot was for different causes. Some of you may remember years ago, we had the home run for Hebrew Home, where we raised money for Charles E. Smith Life Communities. So, but one weekend in 2018, I lived near the Kentlands. They have a 5K Labor Day weekend, and I ran in it. I got first place in my age group, and they suddenly said, "You got the gold medal for Maryland Senior Olympics." I didn't even know, so I didn't even consider myself a senior at the time, but I didn't even know the thing existed. And then they said, and it was a qualifying year, so I qualified to be in the National Senior Games that were going to be in Albuquerque, and I love New Mexico. I visited once. I thought, wow. So again, I'm not a serious athlete, but love it. But the Maryland Senior Olympics, so it's an organization for residents 50 and above, and since 1980, they have provided great competition and camaraderie for mature athletes, and many have advanced to National Senior Games. So every year, the Maryland Senior Olympics, they have a book here that's come out for the events coming up in 2023. They have competitive sports events in 5-year age groups of 50 to 54, 55 to 59, 60 to 64, and so forth. And the top 3 finishers in each group win medals. And then every odd year is a qualifying year for the National Senior Games, and I'll talk about those in a minute. So the top 4 at each state event qualifies for national if then you meet the cutoff time. And over the course of time, I've done, I'll show you what the medals look like. So gold for 5K, and I've gotten bronze for the 10K, which is at the Baltimore Zoo. I've gotten gold for track. I run 5K and 10K. I had a fall running my first track meet. I didn't realize you had to have certain shoes, and a woman kind of veered and hit me. So I'm still a little superstitious about track, but I do 5Ks and 10Ks. Unlike the marathons, which we have, Robin is a marathon runner. But the big thing that they have is that you don't have to be a world-class athlete to compete. The motto is to participate to win. So like the 5K, you have lots of seniors there, and not necessarily just those that are winning the gold, silver, or bronze medal, but to participate. And there's all different, there's even, my husband has a hip issue, and he loves to run, but really isn't able to run anymore. So I'm trying to convince him to pick up the javelin throw, because we have a really big backyard, and very few people compete for the javelin throw, unlike pickleball, which is highly competitive. So I'm trying to convince him pick up the javelin throw, and then he can join me at the national games. He's not convinced yet. So the games are conducted in partnership with Montgomery County Recreation, and some are held in other counties. As I mentioned, the 10K race, that's held in Baltimore, right around the zoo, very hilly. And it was created through the joint efforts of Baltimore County and the Maryland State Commissions on Physical Fitness. And it was under the leadership of Dr. Robert Ziegler. The first competition was held October 4th at Towson in 1980, and only 300 athletes participated. And today, about 1,500 athletes compete in the Maryland Senior Olympics. The events are held for men and women, about 24 different sports, and about 100 events. But again, it strives to provide opportunities for everyone, not just a gifted athlete. So I mentioned, the National Senior Games, based on these state successes, they came up with a national program, and that began in 1985, and it's competition for folks that do well at the local state level. And it offers 20 different sports. It's held every other year around the country, just like the World Games are held in different places. They try to have it in the north, the south, the east, the west, around the country. And it is the largest multi-sport championship in the world for seniors. It's also a nonprofit organization, and it's dedicated to motivating active adults to lead a healthy lifestyle through the National Senior Games movement. If you look on their website, they have great resources just for exercise resources and well-being, and the stories. I find it a true shock and honor to participate, but I go there as a psychologist. I love life stories. So to go to these events and meet people from all around the country of all different ages and hear their stories, folks who at one point in time, because there wasn't Title IX, perhaps they didn't have the opportunity, or they're busy with life, or because of racial issues, that they weren't able to compete at a time, and now they're able to, or there are people who are truly career athletes that were varsity when they were in college, and their life careers devoted to coaching, and some of them have suffered illness and disease, and they've come back. So it's truly, in a minute I'm going to show you a couple videos, it's really inspiring. So to participate, you have to be 50 or older, and it goes all the way up to over 100, and you have to qualify first. In 1987, the first National Senior Olympic Games were held in St. Louis, only 2,500 competitors. In 1990, they had to change the name of the Olympics. World Olympics didn't like them using the World Olympics, so they changed to National Senior Games Association. 2019, that's the first year I participated. And what they do, too, it's also sort of a cultural event. It highlights, the host city, the host state. So back in 2019, there were 13,882 competitors, and 2022 was delayed a year because of the pandemic. We were in Fort Lauderdale, which is great because my older son and daughter-in-law are medical residents in Miami nearby. There were 12,065 competitors, and I've qualified now for Pittsburgh, and that's going to be this summer. So we don't know how many people will be involved with that. So 2 photos here. On the left, I'm in Albuquerque at the finish line, and there's a woman I'm standing next to. She's from Maryland. She's 89, just on the cusp of turning 90. So she's the top of her age group, which is harder. And she has competed before in the Olympics. She almost didn't come because she was struggling with deep vein thrombosis, but she was able to come. And in the national games, you win gold, silver, bronze, or then they offer ribbons from 4th through 8th place. And she wins the 4th place ribbon for the country. So, and I didn't realize there's an altitude issue in Albuquerque, and no one told me, again, you have to train for altitude. So people actually went training, they had canisters, or they took steam baths. This I didn't know. So I finished. But what was even more fun is on the right side, a few of you may recognize, the woman that's saying it was 5'8" this is Catherine Switzer. So she is a renowned female runner. She's a marathon runner. Back in 1967, she was the first woman ever to run the Boston Marathon, when women were not allowed to run the marathon. She used her initials, and you can look it up, 1967, there's a race official that tries to yank her off the course. Her boyfriend at the time punches him out, and she finishes the marathon. She went on to win first place in the New York City Marathon, and she is just an inspiration. She's she's opened all, running for women, but she's all about empowerment of women, and she's a public speaker, and so she was emphasizing the mental health benefits of running, and did anyone have anything to say about it? So I stepped up as a geriatric psychologist. The woman on the right, a geriatric psychiatrist from another state, and the woman next to Catherine is a 90-plus-year-old woman who, after her husband died, became seriously depressed and suicidal. And she took up running to try to overcome her grief and her depression, and here she is competing. This is made down in Fort Lauderdale, and so part of the games, just like the World Games, they have a parade of the athletes. So when they call you in, they have Alabama march in, they have Washington State march in every state. So, I go in dressed up. I do have a hat, and my younger son actually got me the cape to wear, too. And it's just, Maryland has great colors, great flag. So, and the cape actually got me to be able to march in with the flag bearer. So it's just, once again, to see people from Alaska, from Hawaii, from everywhere, it's just a lot of fun. And we are here at there's also the flame, they light the flame, the torch. So this year it was the celebration of the 50th anniversary of Title IX. So there's a group of African American women who had played at a basketball team back in the day in Florida, and they weren't able to compete due to lack of Title IX. So here they are competing. And the final flame bearer was Catherine Switzer herself. She runs up to the cauldron and lights the cauldron, to celebrate 50 years of Title IX. And here I'm going to have them play a video from Albuquerque. What I'm going to ask you to look at for the Albuquerque one, there's a woman, I'll point her out, she's 103. Some of you may have seen the media back in 2019. Her name was Julia Hurricane Hawkins. She set a new world record. Why? Because there was no one in that age group, 100 to 104. And she runs the 100, the 50, and she is still living. She's 107, but she was beat. Her time was beat by a woman who was 102 and a couple years later. But then she set new world records, 105, 106 in her home state of Louisiana. So at 105, 106, and you'll see her, and she's just phenomenal. So if you could play the first video. This is Albuquerque, New Mexico. This is the flame arrival ceremony in New Mexico, and that's a local New Mexican Mexico athlete. That's her, that's 103. Here's a Maryland flag.
In 1985, 7 really dedicated St. Louisans sat together, wondered about starting National Senior Olympic.
This is there's different states marching in.
Almost 14,000 competitors. This is the largest qualifying athletic event in recorded history. There's a lot more life in seniors than just collecting Social Security checks.
That's her again, 103. And a lot of people too, over the years, you meet people you've met, like the next Olympics, it's, you know, you make these connections. And we're going to show the second one, which is Fort Lauderdale. But while he's setting that up, I just want to say, for myself, I experienced, especially during this pandemic, such distress, such despair, such impairment, dementia, you know, death, dying. So for me, this is a different experience. This is empowering. And for me, it helps me counterbalance what I see on a regular basis as a psychologist is kind of the flip side of it. So I'm well aware of the two extremes, but this whole experience is very therapeutic for myself. Plus, I love to hear the stories that people have to share. So we're going to show Fort Lauderdale now.
1, 2, 3, let's go!
That's Catherine Switzer with a torch. She's 102 that way. This is my race. So down in Fort Lauderdale, you know, running the 5K especially, I'm one of the few who isn't like a marathon runner, a half marathon runner, wasn't a varsity athlete. So I ran hard, and then I ran the 10K, and I don't run as many 10Ks. So I thought, I'm not going to kill myself because I also was going to meet up with my son and daughter in Miami later in the day. But I ran hard, and then again, they award from 1st through 8th place. I, you know, finish. And one of my co-runners turned to me and said, "You just missed 8th place by a few seconds." So I got 9th place. So now I'm thinking, okay, you know, now Pittsburgh is coming up, so, you know, maybe there's a chance. Also, you know, I was a top part, I'm now at the top part of my age group, so it's depressing to think about getting older, although it's going to put me at a competitive advantage. So at the end of this month, I age up. So that puts me in an advantageous place for Pittsburgh, although Pittsburgh is much hillier than Fort Lauderdale. So just 2 more slides to go. So if we're talking about, you know, we're talking about engagement in high-level sports. What are the psychosocial benefits of that? What I like is the terms that are used by American Psychological Association. They talk about aging in motion and defying age, not denying age and not taking, you know, risks, but how can we resist, redefine, and accept aging? One thing that was really so distressing, for many things were distressing about the pandemic, but looking how marginalized older adults were, how disconnected they were, and the feeling that so many had that they just did not matter. So to try to now come up and take a different kind of approach and to try to, again, resist, redefine, accept aging, and it offers all kinds of stimulation, get a sense of enjoyment and competence, new social relations, and a new positive identity. I know for me how empowering it's been. And for a lot of women, for a lot of that, again, growing up in Indianapolis back when I was in high school, there was no cross country for women. So things have changed a great deal. And I also will say here, when growing up, my father was chair of a children's hospital, and he used to tell myself and my 5 siblings, he would go and he was seeing the children who were not well, who were sick. But we were blessed with good health, and we should never, ever take that for granted and use that for the power of good. And I realized it's a small little thing, but if I run in a race that benefits some particular cause, that's something I can offer and do. On Sunday, I ran in the Race for Hope, and that's by the Society for Brain Tumors, and that was to support the families of several people that I treated in the past. And then late Saturday night, I got a text from a close friend and medical colleague who had just been diagnosed with a brain tumor. So the run on Sunday was even more meaningful to me. So it's a little thing that I can do, but that's also a motivating factor for myself. So to conclude with, what are some unanswered questions? Well, if you ask me, what's the right dose? How frequent, how intense, what's the duration to improve that protective mental health response? We don't know. It depends on the activity, on the person. Don't know exactly, but it does help. Another unanswered question, precisely, under what circumstances and how can it protect our gray matter from atrophy or neurodegenerative effects? Again, it's just one factor. It helps. The precise formula, don't know exactly. But I do think we need to think about the psychological benefits, not just the physical. So when working with folks, don't say this is good for your physical health, but psychologically, because some people say they don't mind, they don't want to be in super rich, but it helps cognitively, it helps socially. So I think that exercise and health professionals need to emphasize that as well. And the main challenge is how can we find an effective way to encourage older adults to increase that habitual physical activity and reduce sedentary behavior? I do believe that every physical intake eval, every psychological intake eval needs to think about physical activity. And just like I outlined earlier, what are the barriers? What are the facilitators? And should be part of their intake eval with ongoing review. And that can help develop strategies to overcome barriers, to exercise and stimulate folks to participate in physical activity, but you have to adapt it to their needs, capability, and interests of older adults. And May, we know, is the Older Americans Month, apparently. And the theme, interesting, this year is Aging Unbound. And I think that's just such a great, theme this year coming out of the pandemic that we need to think about. How can we challenge stereotypes, okay? I don't expect everyone to perform like the level that I'm performing at, but how can we all try to stimulate and encourage just, folks to continue moving as we age? And with that, I will pause and see if anyone has any questions. I know, I'm going to be. No, and I work with a lot of older adults who used to be really active, and how hard it is when you just write. I mean, yeah, to not think twice of just getting up and, jumping up to do something, can't do that. Yeah. So any questions, anyone? Yes.
You inspired me. I'm signing up for the Senior Olympics.
There you go. Yeah, no, it's it. Yeah, I mean, for all different sports, all kinds of sports. So indeed, you can just look up their website too.
I already registered, but I got a 404 forbidden in the middle of registering. Try it again.
Okay, very good. You want to step up the mic?
I was just going to say that for many people, the goal is not necessarily getting back to what we could do,
Oh, yeah.
but preserving what we have and pushing the limits. So you can't hike up a mountain anymore, but you can take a mile-long stroll around the lake on a flat path. Okay, that's good, you're moving, you're doing something. And exercise isn't necessarily going to the gym or being able to do everything in a class. I tell a lot of folks, like, go to YouTube, do seated chair yoga. You know, you can actually build your core strength by doing seated chair yoga. Turn on some, Motown music and dance with a friend. Things like that to work it in. So not all of us are athletes or have the ability to be or the time or whatever, but both for us and the people for whom we care for, that's what I think has worked. I told one patient, do something, anything you want. What do you like doing? She said, I like dancing. She's now taking ballroom dancing lessons and going to be an instructor. I told another patient, I know you are in a wheelchair and you don't have the flexibility you used to. Start with chair yoga. And now this guy's doing chair yoga once a week, So
Yeah, and that's part of that sort of evaluation. Try to find out, what works and what would be motivating for them.
And adapt it, If you can't hold barbells while you're working out, strap something to your wrist. Be creative about it, Don't take no, find a way.
Thank you. Any other questions?
So I hope you didn't address this while I scooted out of the room. So you said earlier that the president of Swarthmore was diagnosed with early onset Alzheimer's and she was doing physical exercise to help slow the progress. Why does that slow the progress, do you know?
They, again, don't know exactly, but, and how much and, how beneficial it is. But it's probably a whole combination of different hypotheses. It's probably some of the physiological changes, but some of it's probably just the feeling of, competence and engagement. It's probably multifaceted how it improves it. So don't know precisely, but, and again, not across the board, and it probably depends on what sort of physical activity, but, it's anything that's kind of stimulating. But I do believe just even a positive mindset goes a long way for health, so.
Thanks.
You're welcome. We'll all do, set up a walking activity. No. Walk with purpose.
66.